Welcome to a special edition of Suncoast FYI. I'm Nancy O'Neill. Joining me today are two distinguished gentlemen, Chicago native and Sarasota resident David Houle, who is an author, a futurist, former network television executive, and currently futurist in residence at Ringling College of Art and Design. To my left is SNN News Director Craig Burdick, who I asked to join us today. Craig has been at SNN since October of 2005. In April, he celebrated 50 years in TV and radio and 70 years on this earth. Welcome to you both. In the first part of our discussion with futurist David Houle, we'll be discussing what exactly makes a futurist and what the landscape for the movement looks like here on the Suncoast. David, it's great to have you here, finally, and I think our viewers would like to know what a futurist is.
Well, different futurists answered the question differently. I regard being a futurist as being a catalyst to get people, markets, companies, the world to think about the future and then to facilitate a conversation about it.
Okay.
I have found that people really don't think about the future.
Now, and just to kind of spin off on that a little bit, how do you view yourself differently from, say, a Renaissance man or a visionary? I mean, what puts you in the futuristic category, so to speak?
People have called me a visionary just because I have these visions about the future. And it's funny you say Renaissance man, because in this third book in this series, we do a whole chapter on the Renaissance man, which is Leonardo da Vinci.
Yes.
So I admire him greatly. Basically, a futurist, I professionally try to see what's going to happen. Not so much what I want to happen, but what I think is going to happen. And that serves a great function. I grew up in my 20s. I read all the great futurists of the last 75 years. Dr. Alvin Toffler, R. Buckminster Fuller, and Marshall McLuhan are the three, and Andy Warhol to some degree, because we live in his world. And so I grew up at an early age. I kept thinking, okay, so this is a really good gift if somebody has it.
Yes.
And then in my professional life, I always did things that people said wouldn't work. All my life, people said, "Oh, you live ahead of the curve."
Exactly.
So living my whole life is, all of a sudden, I realized in the early part of this century that this ability to see what the next big thing is could, in fact, become a career.
Okay. Now, I think Craig has probably a question to follow up from that.
Well, first of all, I read the first two books. I did not get to the third book. But in your second book, you list several periods of massive change.
Right.
And I guess my question for you would be, who is to say that one or more of those times were not as disruptive, especially for those people living in them? I look at that period of time that you listed any number of things between 1875 and 1925, and it had been positively cataclysmic for those people, yes?
Right. Well, the three things I listed in the book was 1450 to 1525, movable type press, end of the Italian Renaissance, 1775 to 1825, invention of capitalism, democracy, the industrial age, and what you said, 1875, 1925, everything that we live in, right?
Yeah.
The difference is twofold. One, those were either 75 or 50-year time frames.
Yes.
At that point in time, the average lifespan was like 40 years.
Yeah.
So if somebody was alive when the movable type press was invented in 1450 in Germany, probably somebody didn't have access to the consequences of that for 50 or 75 years somewhere else in the world. Same thing if 1875 to 1925. Maybe if you were a young child in 1880 and you lived to be in the 1920s, you could look back at your life and say a whole lot of change. So the point is that all three of those, the amount of change was experienced over multiple generations. Today, with fiber optics, speed of information 187,000 miles an hour, right? We know what happened in China last hour, right? So the difference is the longevity of the period. I think there'll be as much change in the 2020s as any half of one of those times. So there'll be 20 or 30 years of change, and we're all going to experience it together. So that's the profound difference, the generational length and the lack of connectivity. I mean, think about that. 1775 to 1825, the speed of information was a horse day. Yeah. How far a horse could go in a day. Yeah. So that's the difference.
You called the 2020s the most disruptive.
Yes.
What are the events leading up to that has us where we're at today?
Yeah, so I started realizing this about 2016, 2017, that most of the dynamics, the macro trends and the forces were going to converge in this decade. So then I started really starting to look into that. And if you just think about, so we're sitting here in late July, so we are 25% of the way through the 2020s, 30 months, right? And think is what's happened in 30 months. You know, a global pandemic that's still ongoing, a fast recession, a fast recovery, a bear market, a bull market, a land war in Europe, to total disassemblage and beginning reorganization of the workplace, and I could go, and storming of the Capitol by citizens that has never happened before. So you just look at everything and it's just like, I guess I'm right? I mean, the amount of change that we have gone through in the last 2.5 years rivals almost any other decade of our lifetime.
Coming up, we take a look at the 2020s as a whole, and David gives us his point of view on the big dynamics of the decade. So please stay tuned.